The history of the pharmacist relates to the eye. The pharmacist's predecessors were the alchemists, and the pharmacist's logo much resembles the latter form of the logo for the alchemists as well. Both symbols look like an R with the forward leg of the R slashed. There's got to be a reason for that. Why does it look like that? Furthermore, a lot of people will describe the pharmacist symbol as an R with an overlapping X. There's a reason, and I'm going to tell you. The story begins in ancient Egypt, 3,000 years BC. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a character named Horus is where the story begins. Horus is depicted as a man with a head of a falcon, a peregrine falcon, who lost his eye, his left eye, avenging his father's murder. What Horus did is he brought his shattered eye to the healer Thoth, who was the father of alchemy, and this alchemist applied his skills and sprinkled his herbs on the eye and reassembled it, and then Horus took his reassembled eye to the resting place of his father, which brought his father back to life. And so this eye of Horus came to represent power and welfare. The markings under the eye of Horus are stylized face markings of a peregrine falcon. From hieroglyphic studies, we've learned that sections of the eye of Horus were used in Egyptian mathematics. And the alchemists of the time used these fractional symbols from the Eye of Horus in their notes on the recipes for making their concoctions. Consequently, the Eye of Horus became the logo of the alchemists. Now in Egypt, a tradition amongst the sailors was to paint this lucky eye on the bows of their ships, and you know, the original symbol was very stylized, so they sort of simplified it a bit. And then as they subsequently traveled north through the Mediterranean up to Greece, the Greeks liked the idea, and so they mimicked it and further simplified it to the point where you got a symbol that looked very much like the letter R with cross-hatched forward leg. Now, the logo of the pharmacist, the modern pharmacist, is derived instead from the Latin word recipe, which means take. Before the 18th century, manuscripts were written in Latin, not in English, and certain professions, including pharmacology and medicine, continued to use Latin after that time. Now, the way prescriptions worked way back then, the physician would write a recipe which were instructions not to a patient as is today, but rather to the pharmacist on exactly what kind of concoction he wanted the pharmacist to devise. And then the pharmacist would have to refer to his notes to try to figure out how to make that. So, for example, the physician's prescription may say, take a tablespoon of ginger extract, but the pharmacist's notes would say, take a ginger root, and to extract the oil, take so-and-so and so-and-so. Now, the both of them were using the word take, take, take all the time. Pinch of this, pinch of that. And again, they're writing this in Latin, and so they're writing the word recipe, starts with an R. And they really wanted to try to figure out how they could abbreviate that quickly so they could write faster. Well, the convention was already there for them from years prior, because Latin texts would crosshatch all the R's in a manuscript, not just the word recipe, to approximate the symbol for the god Jupiter, the protector god. And so it was to try to bless the manuscript. And so both the physicians and the pharmacists would cross their R's. So you can see, ultimately, this symbol resembles very much the latter form of the Eye of Horus that they were painting on the ships. And so it makes for an interesting point that the logo for the pharmacists should come to look so much like the logo of their very predecessors, the alchemist, but by completely different origins. Bringing us to 1843, that's when the printing press made its appearance. And the printers would pre-print the stationery used for prescriptions with this R that was crossed. And so the symbol continued on, even though by that point people were starting to write in English exclusively. Then another major change occurred in the latter part of the 1900s with the birth of the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry. The audience for a physician's prescription shifted from instructions for a pharmacist to instructions for a patient. If you take a look at an old prescription bottle, on the label, which came to match the prescription, the beginning of the instructions was this cross-hatched R. So you'd see the symbol, one tab once a day. In more recent years, the instructions on the prescription and the label as well, which matches it, are entirely in text. For example, the complete word "take one pill once a day." And so consequently, that the cross-hatched R was an abbreviation for the word take in Latin has become forgotten. In fact, even worse than that, you'll see some companies use the cross-hatched R on the label in addition to the word take. And so this redundant practice is really like saying take, take, further obscured the history of this symbol. The effect it did have was to shift an abbreviation for a word to a logo for an industry. Now, some folks describe that symbol you'll see on a pharmacy window as an R with an overlapping X. Now, where that came from was when they invented the typewriter in 1873, there was no way to type this cross-hatched R with a typewriter. The closest they could do is the letter R followed by the letter X. And so that's how it was done. This began this notion that that symbol is an X overlapping the R. Further reinforcing this erroneous notion that that symbol has an X on top of an R is the way physicians came to abbreviate a lot of words in their notes. A convention is to take a common word like physical or fracture and just write the first letter followed by the algebraic infinitive x to connote that the word had been abbreviated. So fracture becomes fx, history is hx. But here's the dilemma. Both physical and prescription, starting with a P in English, both start with the same letter. And they're both common, so they wanted to abbreviate them. And what they did is they thought, well, wait a minute. RX has been, at least in those years prior, been the conventional abbreviation related to prescription, so we'll stick with that, and PX is physical. But if you think about it, it's the only medical abbreviation that is not an abbreviation of an English word, but of recipe, a Latin word, because the word prescription starts with P, not with R. So then, full circle, ultimately, that symbol you see on the window of a pharmacy or on its sign is the original form of the word recipe abbreviated, and there is no X, no overlapping X, no X at all in that symbol. So now that you know that there's no X in what people call the RX symbol, see if your pharmacist knows. With all this talk about prescriptions, think about aspirin. It's over the counter, it's cheap. But if aspirin were invented today, it would be the most expensive drug on the market. Consider that the two most serious disorders you can go to a hospital with is a heart attack or a stroke. And what do all those people always walk out with? They may have a slew of medicines, but it's always aspirin. I might have mentioned before that aspirin is actually an acronym. It's A-S-P-I-R-I-N. A is for its chemical name, acetyl salicylic acid. SPIR is from Spirea, hard to pronounce, the plant from which it was derived. And IN was a suffix used at the turn of the century to identify chemical compounds as medicinal, for example, penicillin. Now, unfortunately, most drug names are sort of nonsensical. They don't mean anything. There are a few exceptions. There's a water pill, a diuretic called Lasix, and that's because it lasts 6 hours. And then there's a hormone that women take called Premarin, and that's because it's from pregnant mare urine.